Let's move into a much less contentious world, a world of information and communication. Ida Forster and Jeff Covey from KAGA are going to talk to us about bridging knowledge gaps across communities, some of whom are obviously going to include the external experts that we've been talking about, and talking about how the communication of good quality information can leverage existing relationships, create new ones, and expand networks. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to the attendees for joining this event and this session. We are going to talk about community engagement from a medical publisher's point of view. So you see, instead of talking about key opinion leaders or key experts, we've decided to give it a much broader term and talking about communities in the end, where you will find all these different stakeholders that are important for us. Before I start though, let me quickly note that I will of course share experiences and insights from KAGA publishers' perspective. Much of what I will talk about, however, applies not only to KAGA, but to many, if not most, publishers and other solution providers. Although I would actually say that our approach is yet rather unique. So what am I going to talk about in the next minutes? I will, of course, give a short introduction to KAGA publishers. I will then talk about where and how to identify communities or key opinion leaders, subject matter experts, and what different types of communities we see in our daily work. I will talk about how we bring together communities and key opinion leaders to fill a certain knowledge gap, and how we support the interaction and exchange between communities and other stakeholders of the health sciences ecosystem. My colleague Jeff Covey will then share some practical examples with you on how we got communities and key opinion leaders involved to create valuable resources for physicians and patients. And after a short conclusion, we will of course be happy to answer any questions from the audience. First of all, a few words about KAGA. KAGA Publishers is a worldwide publisher of scientific and medical content. We are independent and family-run in the 4th generation. Our headquarters is in Basel, Switzerland, but we have offices and representatives all around the globe. Following our mission of connecting and advancing health sciences, we are dedicated to serving the information needs of the scientific community, clinicians and patients by providing high quality publications and smart solutions to enhance the exchange between the various communities. We have a strengthened focus actually on tailored solutions around education and learning, digital health, clinical decision support and patient information, and intensified use of technologies. So let's get a bit into strategy and the question of around how and where we identify communities and what different types of key opinion leaders or communities we see in our daily work. What you can see on the screen right now is what we call the cycle of knowledge. From our point of view, and of course regarding health sciences. And you can see different steps here, starting with the research query. It's the bigger circle and the red one, going via the actual research, the project study design and funding step, the experiments and clinical trials, which generate a lot of data, of course, and that is extremely interesting for us as a publisher. The analysis of the data and preprints, for instance, as preliminary results to speed up communication in the research sector. to the actual publication, as we know in journal articles or book chapters, for instance. And then, of course, the dissemination, reception, and discussion of said research output and content. And at this point, we move into another area. At KAGA, this is represented by our clinical and patient markets unit, and today by my colleague Jeff, where we take the step of knowledge transfer to translate these research information and outcomes to the clinical and practitioner level, actually. And where another step of commercialization also happens, of course. And then finally, another step of knowledge transfer to the general audience, or especially patients and caregivers. And the cycle continues or ends with data, information, and knowledge from patient level going back into research. This is also a step we have started as well at KAGA by introducing new ways and formats of working together with authors and editors who are those key opinion leaders and part of the communities that we engage with, of course. But why am I telling you this? Well, because in many of these different steps in this cycle of knowledge, you will find different types of communities and key opinion leaders. And you can see them here as examples, those red little heads in the slide. So when it comes to research, for instance, you will most likely engage with a group of key opinion leaders, such as researchers and investigators or CROs, among others. Talking about the actual clinical trials, you have, again, different stakeholders, different types of experts and key opinion leaders. The same goes for the analysis of data and implementation of methods. When it comes to publishing, again, you have communities with different key opinion leaders, or how we call them, subject matter experts, who are experts in their field and usually have a lot of experience in publishing and publishing strategies. When it comes to the clinical implementation, however, we find another completely different type of community and key opinion leaders, healthcare practitioners and specialist nurses, for instance. And going to the patient area, we have patients and patient organizations, so-called POLs, if you will, which represent another very important community and group of key opinion leaders. So you see, you can imagine that from a publisher's perspective, we engage with all the different kinds of expert and communities and can act as kind of a facilitator when it comes to the exchange and interaction between the different communities and key opinion leaders along the whole cycle. Which brings me to my next slide, actually. So what we as publisher do is facilitating the sharing and dissemination of knowledge in the communities. And how can one, or how do we do that? Well, first of all, we identify the information or knowledge gap in the communities. Then we identify the subject matter experts or key opinion leaders that have the relevant knowledge to fill that gap. And finally, by developing a plan, or we develop a plan to close that gap by bringing together those subject matter experts and the community using the best possible channels. I will show you some examples of such channels in a minute. Before that, however, I'd like to anticipate and answer one question, namely the question of why. Why are we as a publisher talking about community engagement, and why should one choose a publisher as a partner to identify and engage with those communities to close that knowledge gap? Well, simply because we do have the network and content And we do have the experience of publishing and disseminating the content. We understand the knowledge cycle and the communities behind it. And we can cover the whole process entire. You can see some examples at the end of the slide. So from a targeted call for papers and invitations over the submission and review process to publication as journal, book, or whatever format is needed in print, online, or even an app, from research to clinical practice to public or the patient. And now, as mentioned, you can see here some examples for possible channels and formats to reach different types of communities with your information resource and to facilitate the exchange between them. In this context, I'd like to highlight that when it comes to engagement with communities and key opinion leaders and the exchange of information, we as a publisher do not, or no longer at least, just think of single journals or books, but rather of a suite of channels and formats from that you can pick and choose the most relevant channels or formats according to your, or even better, according to the preferences and needs and requirements of your audience and communities. And how this can work in practice, my colleague Jeff will now show you with the help of 2 case studies. So Jeff, over to you.
Thank you very much. So the case studies that I will present today will be in the context of the Fast Facts series. So established in 1994 and independently published and over 100 topics covered, Fast Facts seeks to address knowledge gaps in healthcare by enabling a dialogue between clinicians and patients and other relevant stakeholders. As Viola mentioned as previously, content is available in various formats, from traditional book publications and ebooks through to interactive e-learning, and from next year podcasts for Fast Facts also. Both examples of these case studies will highlight the importance of including the patient voice right from the outset in order to create valuable, balanced scientific resources that are easily digestible. So the first one that we've got the slide up here is in the context of pyruvate kinase deficiency, which is a rare genetic disease. Given the rarity of the condition, there is little available published resources for clinicians and patients to access outside of sort of traditional research papers. So to help close the educational gap and raise awareness of the disease state, via an educational grant, KAGA commissioned a suite of accessible book publications for both patient and the professional audience. We engaged with and brought together subject matter experts from the US and Europe to produce a balanced, multi-perspective, international overview of the disease state. At the time, there was no dedicated patient advocacy group to onboard. So in this instance, we turned to Facebook, where we found that there was a global active patient forum and sought to engage and build relationship with them. They kindly provided us a steer on what their needs were with regards to content and education. And they were very receptive to being involved in the development of these resources, especially given the lack of available information on the topic. Our engagement with the group proved very useful, particularly for the patient booklet, as we were able to see input and feedback from patients during the writing phase, which actually threw up some very interesting insights, especially around the level of the content, i.e. the complexity. There was consensus among some parties that the initial draft that we developed was too high level for a patient audience. However, when we put the draft to the group, they insisted that we don't remove the technical information. This being a lifelong condition, they wanted a resource that gave them all the facts and were keen to not to have it watered down. It was seen as a resource that they could use with their clinicians, particularly with those with little or no knowledge of PKD. For example, when visiting a GP, they thought it would be particularly useful to have this book with them so that they could give them a quick overview of the condition that they had. The instruction from the group to us, therefore, was to translate the science, make it accessible to the patient audience. And inevitably, this is what we did via the use of high-quality illustrations and bite-sized text, whilst leaving in the technical terminology, but explaining it in useful pull-outs. The success of this approach was underlined by the BMA Patient Information Awards Committee, where the booklet received a highly commended award. Following further feedback, including at international major congresses, such as the EHA, the European Hematology Association, where hard copy versions of the resources were distributed, there was a demand and appetite from both clinicians and patients to have these materials available in local languages, which we duly delivered. We translated and published the booklets in French, Spanish, Italian, and German, and in doing so sought feedback from local experts and patients to ensure that the material was relevant to the local audience. Obviously, differences in approach can vary from country to country, so we wanted to make sure that that was covered. A real plus point in this case of engaging a medical publisher in the development of MedEd is that the resources, such as the ones I described above, are published in the sense that they have an ISBN, making them truly enduring and discoverable from a range of different platforms, including Amazon and Google Books. For example, at the bottom of the slide, I don't know if you can see, but there's a really nice review there from Amazon of a patient whose child has the condition, and they found this to be a really useful tool to help raise awareness amongst the clinical community. And with our free access model as well, it also helps to achieve maximum uptake. And interestingly, since making FastFacts free access, PKD has been one of the top 10 most downloaded resources from the KAGA platform in the FastFacts series. Why? I'm not entirely sure, but maybe curiosity perhaps, but great for disease awareness, particularly in a rare condition such as this one. For the second case study, I'll just talk to you briefly through another sort of approach that we've taken in the context of comprehensive genomic profiling. So given the recent advances in oncology, KAGA have developed various materials on the subject, including resources for pathologists, as well as an interactive educational program for European hospital directors. The latest resource that we're developing is for community healthcare professionals, so i.e. those defined that are working outside of the top specialist hospitals, who don't have a sort of immediate access to the top experts in the field. What we aim to create is a succinct and practical guide to enable the target audience to make informed decisions when it comes to cancer diagnosis and treatment via the use of CGP, comprehensive genomic profiling. As with the PKD resources, we have adopted a multi-stakeholder approach to the development process, this time bringing together a community of oncologists, pathologists, and patient advocates, both from North America and Europe, to gain various perspectives in order to create a well-rounded and useful guide. In order to increase the impact, we felt it was very important to have dedicated contributions from several patient advocacy groups, providing them with a platform for them to deliver insights and experiences from the patient perspective. The object of such approach is to highlight to healthcare professionals the importance of knowledge transfer between healthcare professionals and patients, and indeed that it's essential to have a high level of patient engagement to ensure timely and successful care, as well as the need for shared decision-making. Also, what we want to do is break the mold that educational resources for clinicians should only be written by their peers or fellow experts. It's important that healthcare professionals are aware of and listen to the patient voice. Finally, the added advantage involving multiple stakeholder groups and seeking various endorsements with these resources is that it increases reach and appeal of the piece in question. Often societies and patient advocacy groups are happy to participate in the dissemination of FastFacts resources, either via their digital platforms or via live events. A great way, therefore, to increase visibility of the topic in question. And I'll hand back to Iola for conclusion.
Thank you, Jeff. I think these were two nice examples of how effective and rewarding the interaction and involvement of certain communities and key opinion leaders can be. So speaking from a medical publisher's point of view, effective engagement with communities and key opinion leaders, especially on HCP and patient level, is about identifying knowledge or information needs of a community, or knowledge gaps or information needs of a community, finding the right subject matter experts or source of information that can fill that knowledge gap, and leveraging existing international SME networks, relationships, and channels to facilitate closing that gap. And this is where a publisher, for instance, can help with, given our extensive networks and relationships with editors-in-chiefs, editorial board members, peer reviewers, medical and professional societies and associations, among others. And with this, we have now reached the end of our presentation. You will find my and Jeff's contact information here. Feel free to reach out to us at any time. And now I think we would be open to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, both of you. I thought that was a really interesting presentation, and I was really thrilled to hear about the patient engagement aspects of it, particularly with the pyruvate kinase deficiency. And I think many of these people in a rare disease space have a great need for information so that they can cross the information gap in both directions. It's not just health professional to patient in that area, it's often patient to health professional. So that's great. Does anybody have any questions for Jeff and Diola? Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to ask you some questions. You mentioned that you had looked on Facebook for a Facebook community to identify patient experts. To what extent do you find that communities build over time around projects, or is it something that once you get a set of people working on something, that the project scope is defined and that's it?
I think in this example, obviously when we start out, especially with patient materials, we're looking for patient advocacy groups or people to involve to help, give us a steer with the content. In this scenario, we were left where there wasn't really like this defined classic group, classic advocacy group like Lung Cancer Europe or something like that. So yeah, the reason we reached out to Facebook was we were just trying to find, I think in our search, we were trying to find, are there groups of people out here? And we, as I said, we came across this group on Facebook, and it was great because it was I think it was a closed community, but obviously we spoke to them, and they sort of allowed us in, I guess, once we discussed the project that we were that we were commissioning, and yeah, they were thrilled, I think, that actually someone was taking the time to develop resources on this topic, because there simply really wasn't anything out there that was, that was in an accessible format, like a fast-paced publication or a nice book publication. It was very much like heavy sort of research papers and just maybe summaries of studies that were going on. In terms of the development of the community, I think it's hard to say. I don't know whether that group has grown now from when we first contacted them. I think obviously there's more awareness of the condition now, simply because perhaps I think there's a drug coming through that's sort of nearing the phase 3 endpoint. So obviously I guess there's a heightened excitement that there could be a potential treatment on the horizon. Obviously, with research and things, if the treatment's in research, then often, there's more opportunities to shed light on these conditions, because there's, a willingness to create these materials. Companies are providing funding for educational resources. So from that perspective, it was great. And as I mentioned in my the end of my talk, it was so interesting to see that, and this is, strange in a way, that pyruvate kinase deficiency was one of the top 10 downloaded resources, alongside immuno-oncology, digital medicine, lymphoma, there it was, sort of sat in the top 10. And when we fed back actually to the grantor, Even they were like surprised. Oh, but, how did that come about? And the honest answer is that I'm not sure. But I think maybe it invoked a curiosity there that what is this topic? I need to know more. Don't know anything about it, and the fact that it was available in the different languages, I think possibly helped that. So I think it was a really good project to work on, because it filled a gap that there wasn't the material. We really did address a gap. Sometimes you publish resources in popular areas like asthma or diabetes or something, and there's lots out there, right? So when you have an opportunity to work on rare disease material, it's really nice, because you really are filling a void. And like I really appreciate what you mentioned, like sometimes patients transferring the knowledge to physicians, and that's exactly what the group threw up, is that they often go to their doctor or their GP, or even if they're seeing a specialist for another condition or something, and they have to explain to them that they've got PKD, and that the physician has no idea, well, what's that? I've never heard of it. So actually having a resource that they can take to the physician, they found really helpful.
I can see how that meets a need. And I think the other thing that you've described is something how it's very easy from the pharma side to get very focused on a project, and then when other opportunities open up, those relationships develop. That's extremely valuable as well as the actual item itself. Did you want to add something to that, Iola? I thought I saw you wave in the corner. Perhaps you just moved.
Oh, no, sorry. No, I think Jeff has covered it pretty well, actually. So, yeah.
Okay, I have one other quick question, which is, where do you stand on encouraging lay summaries in more technical papers?
So I can, from my perspective, we publish lay summaries of disease states, 2-page sort of summaries, obviously aimed at patients and heavily illustrated, more like these type of infographic materials. In terms of published papers, that's something I'll probably defer to Iola for. There's more knowledge on that than me.
I think I can say that we're pretty open to look into this. We have already started looking into how and where to publish lay summaries. So we are very open to discussions. It's not that we do it already or in a on a regular basis, but this is something, of course, which I've also given the cycle of knowledge and our aim to really cover all the needs and every single step. Of course, lay summaries, especially when it comes to the from patient level to research, back to research, I think is definitely a topic for us where we will have some developments also over the next month and year.
I know it's something that the patient communities are really wanting to see, and I think there's more and more discussion and good guidance in that area. So it's good to know that you're looking to meet that need.
Yeah, I mean, we have already started, with a patient blog, for instance, where such materials or materials going into this direction are already published, really for the patient and caregivers and people that are involved, and not really on a, let's say, general level rather than the high level research stuff. So this is actually already happening, and what we are currently really looking into is how can we include lay summaries into actual research, or combine that together.
Yes, and I think that's a challenge, but it's something that I think we're getting better at doing and need to keep working on. So thank you, both of you, for that presentation. It was really interesting to see those examples that you shared and to understand more about what you do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.